All right, let's do our prayer before study. Christ, my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work. For to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person, for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. All right. I hope everybody had time to read the beginning of Frankenstein, nice and festive. Well, I've got some papers, but they are still papers for people who aren't here today. So, but you guys have papers for me.
Yep.
I like the way Gabriel said, "Yep."
I will email.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that was.
See,
that was
it's
good.
very hard. It's harder than it
Yes,
looks, isn't
yes.
it? Thank you, sirs. This makes life easy for me. People are gone, and then I determine papers, except when they email. Okay. For next week, I will give you the topic later, but since people like to know what they have to do, we're going to just do a summa, a one paragraph, and I will flesh out the topic of that later. But just 250 to 300 words, just your research, just your response to a topic, which I will bring up later. But first, let's take a look at Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. One more time. You might remember that before we left for break, we read some Longfellow poetry, and I mentioned that he's the first American author that we're encountering this year. We're going to read some American authors. We're going to read Miss Mark Twain and Melville, but this is the first time we've met an American literary personage. And, it took some time. You start a new country, and it takes time to have a distinctive literature, that's your own. But Longfellow was one of our first. Interestingly, another one of our early literary figures is Edgar Allan Poe, which we will be looking at some of his poetry. 4 years ago, we read some of his stories, and I bumped that for other things, but I like Poe. But Poe hated Longfellow. This is why I bring him up. He just thought Longfellow was low class because he was very popular. It was sort of like a symphony conductor and a pop star, right? And Poe was the symphony conductor. It's like, I'm creating art. And Longfellow's just a pop star. But he was very, very popular. Longfellow was very popular. He's very accessible. He's very easy to understand. I put the very long Paul Revere's Ride. Have y'all read this poem before? If you haven't, it's okay. All right, because I'm reading the whole thing today because it's so awesome. And so just to remind you of your American history, the British knew that the colonists were stockpiling weapons somewhere. They heard that they were. And there was some concern that the British were going to march out from Boston and look for the people who were stockpiling weapons, and some of the ringleaders, like the Adams brothers and whatnot, and arrest them. And so they needed to get a message ASAP to people if the British were coming. And it would really be helpful to know how they were coming, which direction they're coming from. And so Boston has a land that sticks out into the harbor. And so you can cross the harbor on boats and get to the other side, or you can go around by land. And so this was the idea. They wanted to put someone there to find out, will they come from this direction or will they be coming from this direction, so they can hide the weapons. They can, anybody who's in danger of being arrested could run away. This is where Paul Revere and his famous Ride comes in. y'all might know that there was another guy too writing. It wasn't just Paul Revere, but Paul Revere gets to be famous, A, because he's Paul Revere, B, because of this poem.
People forget about the second writer.
Which shows you it's just really making friends with writers and poets is good for you. Because if you ever do something awesome, they will make sure you're the one who's remembered and not the other guy. So I just want you to listen to it. Just enjoy. This is an awesome poem. And if you're still looking for poetry to memorize, more than one of my children did memorize Paul Revere's Ride. It's very memorizable because of the meter, but you might want to get on it now if this is the one you want to choose. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. One if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said good night, and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charlestown shore, just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the church, up the wooden stairs with stealthy tread, to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the sombre rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade, by the trembling ladder steep and tall to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent, and seeming to whisper, all is well. A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and stride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes, till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in the village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark struck out by a steed that flies fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light the fate of a nation was riding that night, and the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic, meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises when the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting-house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. and one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm. A cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. That is an awesome poem. He does amazing things with words. First of all, the rhythm. I'm going to say the first stanza again, only I'm not going to say any words. I'm just going to da-da-da-da-da-da-da and listen to it. What does it sound like? What does it sound? What?
Marching.
Marching and writing. He echoes. It's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's Paul Revere writing through the whole poem. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's not perfect meter, but it's like the horse goes faster, slow. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He even mixes up the rhyme scheme. Sometimes every other line, sometimes these two middle lines rhyme and then these two rhyme on the outside. He mixes it up because it's moving. It's always moving. It's always changing because the whole poem is one big ride. It's so fun to say. It's so fun to read out loud. He did a couple of things. On page 105, we have the graves. Above the graves on the hill lies the church, lonely and spectral and somber and still. Lonely and spectral and somber and still. And on the next page, it's got, I'm trying to find it. Tranquil and broad and deep. Beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep. Do we usually use and before or in between every single thing in a list? I went to the grocery store for milk and eggs and butter and bread and cheese. Nobody says that. Maybe if you're kind of thinking of something else to add. But listen to lonely and spectral and somber and still. Tranquil and broad and deep. It's got the rhythm, it's got the march, doesn't it? He uses the word to mimic that. And then, I don't know if you noticed the massive alliteration. Did you guys hear? In the top of the second column of 105, masses and moving shapes of shade. Masses of moving shapes of shade. Oh, it's fun to say. You should just go through the rest of your day and just run around going, masses of moving shapes of shade. A glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle over and over the alliteration. But my favorite part, three favorite parts. Gosh, okay. Look at the first column on page 105 towards the bottom. It's kind of towards the middle. What is the British warship, the mass of the British warship, what are they like? They're compared to something. Like a prison bar. Each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar. So picture it, the ship mast is there and the moon is full. And it's dark against the light of the moon, but what's it like? It's like a prison bar. Why a prison bar?
Because they're taking away your freedom.
Because they're taking away your freedom. They've come to imprison you and enslave you, the British. It's like a prison bar. That's fabulous. And then we have, second favorite, beneath in the churchyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill. What's an encampment? What sort of language? Who do we talk about being in a night encampment? Soldiers, military. It's a military image. Like, even the dead are ready to fight, metaphorically, right? The dead in their night encampment. The whole city is mobilized to fight. They're ready. It's fabulous. Okay. And then my last favorite one is on page 106, when he gallops into Lexington. The meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. The courthouse in Lexington, the blank windows, because the lights are all out, it's night, right? They gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I see. Because in front of them in Lexington is going to be really the first casualties. The first battle of the Revolutionary War is going to happen there the next day in Lexington and Concord. And they already, somebody is asleep who that day is going to be the first one shot. It's going to be the first casualty at the bridge in Concord. It's a wonderful poem. So spend some time. If you're familiar with it, great. If not, read it at least one more time. Read it out loud. Go in a room by yourself if you don't want to read to other people. Read it to your dog or your cat. I don't care. It's fun because poetry is meant to be heard. That's why he throws in the alliteration and the rhythm and everything. And it's not quite the same if you just read it silently to yourself. So spend some time this week with Longfellow and Paul Revere-Ride. I don't know if you took a look at the extra documents. I can't remember. Did I mention anything about the year without a summer? Did we even talk about that?
I think like very, very brief.
Because I was kind of running short on time, and I feel like we were all wigged out because it was Christmas and there were cookies here and whatnot. So I just wanted to talk about this. I'm not going to ask you, you can go back and read it, but I just want to highlight some things in case I didn't before. So in this document tells us that on April 10th, 1815, the most explosive volcanic event in history and among the largest in the last 10,000 years happened in Indonesia. And it ruined the weather. You're probably familiar with this. Even some lesser volcanoes have really affected the climate because the dust and the gases and all the debris sort of hangs in the air and it blocks the sun. So the year this happened, several years after, it says from 1815 to 1818, melted the Arctic ice pack, prompting the first race of nations to the North Pole. Who's the first person we meet in Frankenstein? Walton, and what's he doing? He's going to the North Pole. This was current events. Mary Shelley is writing about things that are in the news currently. It's like, all these people who are heading to the North Pole because they can get farther north than normally because trapped gases have warmed it. However, it also created lots of cloudy weather and rain. So this particular summer, Mary Shelley and her husband Percy, whose poetry we read, and their friend Byron, whose poetry we read, are hanging out in Switzerland because they can. And they're going to go hiking in the Alps, except they're not, because in the summer of 1816, Mary wrote a letter to a sister back home and said, "An almost perpetual rain confines us principally to the house. One night we enjoyed a finer storm than I had ever before beheld. The lake was lit up, the pines on Jura made visible, and all the scene illuminated for an instant." All right. 130 days of rain between April and September of 1816. This is when they picked their. So next time you feel bad about the weather on your vacation, just remember Byron and the Shelleys. Dudes, we picked this summer to vacation in the Alps. The summer that it rained 130 days. Yes. So this led to the writing of this book because they really couldn't go out hiking. And they, actually, my edition, by the way, I did not ask you to read this, so don't worry. But mine has an author's introduction, and she actually tells the story. She says, it proved a wet, ungenial summer, and incessant rain confined us for days to the house. Some volumes of ghost stories, translated from the German into French, fell into our hands. So they're sitting in this house they're renting and reading these ghost stories. We will each write a ghost story, said Lord Byron, and his proposition was acceded to. There were 4 of us. So everybody starts writing. And she says, I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task. One which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror. One to make the reader dread to look round, to curdle the blood, and quicken the beatings of the heart. If I did not accomplish these things, my ghost story would be unworthy of its name. So she sat around to think of what she should write about. And she goes on to say, many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among others, the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. They talked of the experiments of Dr. Darwin. This is Charles Darwin's grandpa. I speak not of what the doctor really did, or said that he did, but as more to my purpose, of what was then spoken of as having been done by him, who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case till by some extraordinary means it began to move with voluntary motion. Probably not.
What's that now?
Pasta. Yeah, that it became alive somehow. And that's why I think she said, I speak not of what he actually did, but of what if people were saying that he did. And you might know, this is not too much before, they're doing experiments to disprove spontaneous generation, right? That like dead meat creates maggots. Because it kind of looked, you leave the meat laying out and then it's crawling with maggots. I'm like, oh, great. Dead meat makes maggots. Like, no, flies lay eggs and they make maggots. But until we did experiments, right, and we covered the meat so the flies can't get at it, then we proved that it doesn't really happen. So this is about that same time, right? They're doing experiments like this. So Shelley and Byron were discussing this. Not thus, after all, would life be given. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. All right, so these are the conversations they're having in this, I don't know, I was going to say creepy house. In rainy weather. So it produces this story from her. Now, I also gave you some pages on galvanism. I don't know if you took a chance to look at this. Galvani is the name of a guy. And this is a follower of his. This is John Aldini, who are experimenting with taking dead body parts and zapping them with electricity and making them move. That's just creepy. But it was a thing. It's good that they did it because they found out that electricity has something to do in our bodies, right? There are impulses, your brain says to your foot, move. You know what I mean? It's got to send a message, and impulses, something travels right now from my brain to my foot saying move, and I'm doing it. It's weird. And they think, okay, it says something with electricity. But Aldini tells us that it was necessary to obtain a human body. He wants to do it on human beings because they're doing it like with frog legs and stuff and making the legs twitch. It was necessary to obtain a human body while it still retained after death the vital powers in the highest degree of preservation. We don't want it to be dead for 2 years and half rotted. We need it fresh. We need it fresh. And hence I was obliged to place myself under the scaffold, as it were. He's using executed criminals. This wasn't okay with everyone. But it was getting to be more okay. Did we already discuss the bodies in Ben Franklin's basement? Did I tell you about that? I think I told you about that they excavated the house that he was staying in London, and there were a bunch of bodies buried in the basement. He's not a serial killer, however. The landlady's son-in-law was a doctor, and he was doing medical, like the dissection for med students, okay, which is normal for us now. We all know that med students, we want them to do that. I don't want to be the first one they cut open. So, but at this point, it was like, I don't know if that's okay. So, but this guy was taking bodies and zapping them, and then he zapped their ears and made the faces twitch and move. Contractions were observed in the face, and the tongue sensibly returned into the mouth. It moved its tongue. Oh my goodness. And then he's practicing like where to put it. I formed an arc from the pile of the right ear of one head to the left ear of the other. It's 2 heads now. And saw with astonishment the 2 heads make horrid grimaces. So that the spectators who had no suspicion of such a result were actually frightened. I guess so.
Oh, yeah.
I would be too. Wow. It was observed, however, that the convulsions excited in the heads disposed in this manner were not so strong as those produced when I performed the experiment on each head separately. So if you spread the electricity out to 2 heads, they don't move. So Mary Shelley herself tells us that Byron and Shelley were discussing galvanism. And they were discussing, what is it that makes us alive? What is that thing we call life? That then when it's gone, you're dead. And if we knew what it was, could we give it to something? And she comes up with this famous story. So the first thing I want to mention is, on my book, this is not true. On perhaps your book, it is not true. But this book actually has a subtitle. You know how often a book has a title? It's blah, blah, or da-da-da-da-da. And they'll give it an alternate title. Do any of you have, do you have your book with you? Does anybody have a subtitle?
I do, but it didn't have an alternate title.
Okay. I'm just curious if there's any edition in here that, yours is probably like mine. Yours is the Dover, but okay. This is the bargain edition. Okay. It's actually, the subtitle is or, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Ah, he's got it. Or the Modern Prometheus. So our first question is, if the author calls it that, we need to know who Prometheus is. Who is Prometheus and what did he do?
Isn't he the wise man that gave human beings fire?
He's not a man.
Like a god?
He was a god. He was one of the Greek gods. The story is that there were 2 brothers, Epimetheus and Prometheus. Prometheus means looking ahead, right? Having foresight. Epimetheus means you don't, like looking behind, you're kind of a dolt, all right? And Epimetheus had the job of giving gifts to all the creatures. So he gives, like sharp claws or sharp teeth or super fast running ability or camouflage or whatever. And he dishes out all the gifts, and then he gets to human beings, he's got no gifts. He gave away everything. So we got no fur, we got no claws, we don't have sharp teeth, we're not the fastest runners, we have no means of defending ourselves whatsoever. This is a bummer. So Epimetheus goes to Prometheus, he's like, buddy, I had one job and I botched it. You've got to help me. So people were just helpless. We're being eaten by wild animals, whatever, because we can't do anything. And so Prometheus steals fire. Mankind does not have fire. Now, in some versions, it's literal fire. In some versions, it's also like, also metaphorical, like the spark of intelligence, right? I mean, we're alive. We're alive already, so it's not the spark of life, but it's the thing that makes us not animals, or better than animals. Makes us rational animals, right? That spark. So you can think of it as both, right? He gives us intelligence, but he also gives us literal fire. He steals it from, like Athena and Hephaestus, and then all the things you do with fire. So we can cook our food. We can heat ourselves. We're not freezing to death anymore. We can scare animals away, right? Like Mowgli in the Jungle Book, right? And Shere Khan. And so also blacksmithing, all the things that we use fire, the crafts that we use fire for. We've got all of that now. Well, Zeus was not amused.
Yeah.
We'll just put it that way. Like, buddy, that was not your gift to give. They're not supposed to have that. They're not allowed to have that. So poor Prometheus then gets chained to a rock, and a vulture comes and like every day eats his liver out, but every night he grows a new one so that they can do it again the next day. It's a bummer. Eventually, he does get let go. He cuts a deal with Zeus because he has information. Prometheus has information that Zeus wants. And so he cuts a deal, and Hercules comes, and he sets him free anyway. I have no memory of what happens to Prometheus after this, but it was a really terrible period of time where he had his liver eaten out and
Yeah,
everything.
before the vulture comes back.
It was awful. So this was his punishment. So keep this in mind, that Mary Shelley has called this the modern Prometheus. So you tell me, because you're halfway through the book, you don't know everything that's going to happen, but what does this book have in common with the Prometheus story that I just told you? What?
Making people.
Okay, yes, the creation of beings, because Epimetheus and Prometheus were participating in the creation. But what else? What other parallel might there be?
What if you like? I think one is like he's trying to like create it, make something better, but both times it went bad for the creator.
Okay, certainly it went bad for Prometheus.
Yeah.
Reference the vulture incident. But also it went badly for, so far in the book it doesn't seem to be going real well for Victor. Victor doesn't seem to be happy. You know what? No, I think it's hopeless. You're welcome to, and it kind of falls off the wall sometimes. Do you want a pen or anything? Okay. So it went poorly for both of them. Now Prometheus gave mankind fire. What does Victor want to give mankind? If Victor is Prometheus, what forbidden thing does he want to give?
Like life after death.
Immortality.
Immortality or life. Who's allowed to give life?
God.
God. And remember, he has given us means of creating life. It's called having children. Human beings can create life. We have been given that ability. But only one way. We can't, sew creatures together and zap it and make it come alive. We're not supposed to do that. So Mary Shelley, so you're reading Frankenstein, and you have the Simphouse book, and he's like, or the modern Prometheus. So before you even start reading, somebody in this book is going to try to snatch a gift from the gods that man isn't supposed to have, according to the gods, and it's not going to end well. We've already set the stage for that. So you start By the way, I've been polling all students. How many of you have seen a movie version of some sort of Frankenstein?
Would Hotel Transylvania count?
Uh, Not really. Well, I mean, somebody yesterday said the Munsters.
not really.
Okay, Fred Munster is obviously Frankenstein. But I was thinking more of an actual, like, it's just about the creature. So have you, like, was it the old Boris Karloff, or is it a newer one? Do you remember who was in it?
No, but it's called I, Frankenstein.
Oh, Daniel, is that the Daniel Radcliffe one where he's Igor?
Yes.
Okay, I like that one. All right, that's very cool too. And James McAvoy is Victor Frankenstein. Okay. There are many, many versions. And the reason I ask you is because I was curious if you had a preconceived idea. So if you have seen lots of Hollywood Frankensteins, they are like, like with a square head and the bolts in the neck and and so it's a little bit of a shocker when you read the book and then Victor meets the creature and the creature says, okay, we're going to have a talk now, and I'm going to give you a lecture on all the things you have done. You're like, what is this? When did he learn to talk? So it's a little shocking. But the other shocking thing is, you open the book and suddenly we meet this guy named Walton on a ship going to the North Pole. Did I start the wrong book? And you're checking, yes, it's Frankenstein. So we already mentioned this. And tell me again, this is the first question I asked you. Where is Walton going and why is he going there?
He's going to the North Pole.
He's going to the North Pole. Why would we want to do that? It's cold there.
So he was saying something about like studying the stars and everything.
Okay.
Getting knowledge.
Because he wants knowledge. What else does he want?
Secret of the globe?
I want to know the secrets of nature. He says,
The wondrous power which attracts the needle.
yeah, because, the secrets of magnetism, because he wants to find maybe the magnetic pole. Yeah, okay, so all of those things that you said. He says, you cannot contest the inestimable benefit which I shall confer on all mankind to the last generation by discovering a passage near the pole to those countries to reach which at present so many months are requisite. I want to find the Northwest Passage. So all of those things that you guys mentioned, he mentions doing, celestial observations at a place where maybe it's clearer and the stars are in different position, and then I'm going to study magnetism, and I'm going to confer the benefit of a shortcut to the Indies and China through the Northwest Passage, and all of these things. I want to uncover the secrets and grant them to mankind. So you tell me, why do we start the book with this guy Walton? What does he have to do with anything?
Well, for one thing, he doesn't actually have anything to do with like anything in Frankenstein. He just runs into Victor close to the end. But I think it's like kind of like similar to Victor. He's looking for power and like intelligence. The same thing Victor sought at one point in his life.
Did you notice that everything Walton says, Victor could say, except just fill in the blank? Like, I don't want to take celestial observations. But he talks the same language, right? I'm going to go down in history as the person who endowed mankind with this great gift, and I need to know. Like, I want to know the secrets of nature. I have to know. And what is Walton's situation at the beginning of the book? How's the trip going?
Fairly well, actually. Like, nothing's like terribly wrong.
Well, how does Victor get on the ship?
Oh, that part. They got stranded.
Yeah, they're stuck in ice. They can't move. They're stuck in ice. FYI, this is not good. Because if we're going to starve to death or, run out of water at the very least. And not to mention that ice, expands when it freezes. And so it can break your boat. But we'll see. It's all a bad, bad deal. And he says, so in letter 1, here's my notes. In letter 1, basically, all the things we just said. He says, I'm going to discover wonders and beauty. I'm going to go to uncharted territory. I'm going to confer benefits on mankind. All right? In letter 2, this is the next question I asked you. What does Walton feel that he lacks, and how is this need unexpectedly fulfilled? What does Walton
Wasn't
need?
he lacking friends? Is what he said?
I don't have a friend. By the way, what is this we are reading at the beginning? Like, what's Walton doing?
Oh, this is like journal, like diary.
Actually, it's not. It's letters.
Oh, letters.
It
Oh, to
says
his
he's
sister.
writing letters to his sister in England. And he's saying things like, well, by the time you see this, maybe I'll be there, or maybe I'll be dead, or maybe I'll see you again someday, or maybe I won't, or maybe you'll never see this, or, it's very iffy.
There was lots of ifs.
So I guess when you're trapped in ice near the North Pole, there's not a whole lot to do. So we're going to write letters. And so in his second letter, he says, yes, I have no friend, Margaret. When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be none to participate my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me in dejection. He says, how would such a friend repair the faults of your poor brother? I wish I had a friend. How is that related to this book? Okay, does he get a friend? Maybe?
Technically,
Okay, Victor, he's like, oh, this is a guy, I understand this guy. Like, he's a scientist like myself, okay. Doesn't quite turn out maybe the way he planned. We don't actually know at this point, because you've only done half the book, how it's going to turn out. But is there another way? I want a friend and companion. Does friendship or companionship have anything to do with this book so far?
No.
It does eventually. Hold on to that thought. All right? I wasn't sure if he said it. If he says it, actually I'm going to go because I don't want to blow it up by saying anything that's not the part you read. Hang on. What is the creature doing? Okay, I had to stop in the middle of his very, very long speech, right? And he says he's telling his history. He's telling Victor his history. At the point where I had you stop, what's he doing? Where's he living and what's he doing?
Oh, he was just living in like a cave, or like he calls it his like den or something, and then he just keeps visiting this family, watching what they do, understanding their language, reading the books that they throw out.
Okay.
Or he found, sorry, maybe they didn't throw it out.
Yeah. He's living in a lean-to that's attached to this cottage out in the woods, spying on the inhabitants of the cottage. How is wanting a friend related to this? What does he want?
Frankenstein.
The creature wants companionship, right? Like, oh, I'm going to live with these people, and then they're going to be my friends. You know what I mean? I'm going to learn how to talk, and I'm going to learn to read and how to behave like a normal person, and then they're going to be my friends. Right? So, letter 1, I want to discover the secrets of nature. Letter 2, I want a friend. And we've got Victor and the creature already going. Letter 3, I just underlined one sentence. Letter 3 is very, very short. Who can stop the determined heart and resolved will of man? When you want something, mankind has the ability to stick with it and get it. And then in letter 4, Frankenstein joins the ship. And basically letter 4 just bleeds into the story, right? And Victor, before Victor starts telling the story, I want you to hear what Walton writes to his sister. He is now much recovered from his illness and is continually on the deck, apparently watching for the sledge that preceded his own. Yet, although unhappy, he is not so utterly occupied by his own misery, but that he interests himself deeply in the projects of others. He has frequently conversed with me on mine, which I have communicated to him without disguise. He entered attentively into all my arguments in favor of my eventual success, and to every minute detail of the measures I had taken to secure it. I was easily led by the sympathy which he evinced to use the language of my heart and to give utterance to the burning ardor of my soul, and to say, with all the fervor that warmed me, how gladly I would sacrifice my fortune, my existence, my every hope to the furtherance of my enterprise. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. I'm going to read that last sentence again. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire and transmit over the elemental foes of our race. That's Walton talking. He's telling Victor, does it matter? Does it matter if I lose some crew members? Does it matter? If I die? Does it matter? Does it matter? If I just attain my goal? A death is small price to pay for the discoveries that I'm going to make. He says, over the elemental foes of our nature. What sort of foes do you think Walton thinks he's going to conquer? What is Walton going to conquer?
Like the elements.
Okay, the elements. Like we're going to show that human beings can travel all the way to the North Pole. We're going to conquer the cold. We're going to conquer geography. What else are we going to conquer? Maybe, for Walton.
What's it called? Probably like disease or something like that, if he wants to conquer all the foes.
Well, but he's not specifically doing anything that would conquer disease, is he? If he finds a Northwest Passage,
That would
what foe would he sort of be conquering?
Like distance.
Distance and time, right? That it takes people, I mean, they're sailing around South America,
Yeah.
right? People at this point are sailing, around Africa or South America to get to the Far East. But if you could just the Northwest Passage, like it would be a lot easier. So I'm going to conquer time, I'm going to conquer space, I'm going to conquer geography. But of course, what elemental foe does Victor want to conquer?
He wants to conquer, well, essentially death.
Death. What bigger foe do we have? It's the last foe to ultimately be destroyed, right? The first foe to fall at the resurrection, but the last one to be completely done away with. He's going to conquer death. Walton and Victor are very, very much alike. So Victor starts telling his story, and what sort of studies, let's just go to the next question. What sort of studies attract Victor? What do they make him eventually able to do? And what event in his life may have contributed to his desire to learn this? What does he like to study, Gabriel?
He said the secrets of heaven and earth.
Yes.
Consider that.
Mm-hmm. And any particular, like weather secrets or?
Is she like
Like magic.
magic, chemistry?
Yeah.
Scientist.
Yeah. And do you notice, we just said it, you guys just said it, and we've talked about this before, that science and technology and magic are, kind of blend together. If somebody came in a time machine and they saw this contraption here, it's like, oh, she magically captures herself and puts herself on the screen. It's like, no, that'd be science and technology, but it seems magical, right? And so, he says this, Gabriel. He says he's comparing himself to Elizabeth, right? Elizabeth is the adopted orphan girl that they take in. He says she, with a serious and satisfied spirit, contemplated the magnificent appearances of things. I delighted in investigating their causes. I want to know why. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And then what Gabriel said, it was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. And whether it was the outward substance of things or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. And specifically, okay, this is obvious, just painfully obvious. What does it enable him to do?
He creates life.
Creates life. And is there anything that happened in his life previously that we might understand why he's so driven to do this?
His mother died of scarlet
His
fever.
mother died of scarlet fever. If only she didn't have to die. If only when someone died you could bring them back. Trying to decide if I want to. Okay, just a second. So he picks up these books, right? And this Cornelius Agrippa and Albertus Magnus, and they're a little bit old-fashioned at the time, and they're a little bit what you were calling alchemy, and like the sorcerer's stone or the philosopher's stone, they call it in England, right? Or the fountain of youth. Or again, his dad says that's a bunch of trash. Just throw it away. And then he goes to college, and there's like first professor, that's a bunch of trash. You're gonna have to learn everything again. Which made him. Have you ever noticed that sometimes if someone tells you not to do something, it kind of makes you want to do it more? Yeah. So now he wants to do it even more, right? But he finally hooks up with a professor who shows him the wonders of chemistry and biology. And the professor says this: the ancient teachers of this science promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted, that the elixir of life is a chimera. In other words, we know you can't turn lead into gold. We know there's no fountain of youth. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. Chemists, biologists, they do perform miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. Do these scientists have any boundaries, according to this professor?
No.
It's only going to get better and better. They're only going to find more and more and more and more and more. This is where it's at, Victor. This is what you got to study. Chemistry. Well, this is where the secrets are. Now, do you guys remember Descartes and the Enlightenment? And we're going to measure and test everything in a laboratory. And Francis Bacon and Descartes, who said, it will make us masters and possessors of nature, right? We will master nature. We'll master life. We'll master death. This professor is basically an Enlightenment thinker, right? He's the epitome of science can do everything. All the secrets are there. And Victor's just ready to fall for it, right? Because he's already primed for it. This is what he loves. He says, this is just the way I came, right? I just want to find out the secrets of things. But he says something else, and he says it enough times that I don't think it's an accident that Mary Shelley has him saying it. Listen, let me read a couple of quotes. He says, he says about, he says he was acquainted with the laws of electricity, and he says, and galvanism. It says it right in the book. But it says, and he says, somebody who warned him against all of this. It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. And then just in the next paragraph, it says, something happened. It was the scarlet fever. An omen, as it were, of my future misery. So we have destiny, omen. He says, the next morning I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some principal professors. Chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which asserted omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from my father's door, first led me to Mr. Kremp. So we have inexorable fate. And then that thing I just read about conquering nature, it says, such were the professor's words. Rather, let me say, the words of fate enounced to destroy me. And then at the end it says, thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Okay. Destiny, fate, destiny, fate. Do people, what kind of people blame everything on destiny or fate? That's a very open-ended question.
Would it be like the pagans?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good answer. That is a poorly asked question. Let me give you 2 examples. If somebody feels guilty and is apologizing for what they do, does that person say, destiny, fate, chance made me do it? No. No. If you ate the pie that your mother baked for dinner, first of all, if you ate the whole pie, that's gluttony. That is a sin. You should not eat the whole pie. But even if you ate part of the pie, and your mother, and you said, it was fate. It was like, it is just in my nature. It is my nature to smell pie, and I am impelled to eat it by a destiny outside of me. Your mother's like, no, that's not the right answer. No, you say, you know what? I wanted to do such and such, and I did it, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. That's what we say, right? So, here's the thing. Victor, remember we have things going on in this story. We have an outside story. They actually call it a framing story. Just like a picture has a frame and it sets the picture off, you know. Have you ever noticed that a picture looks, you wouldn't think it would make that much difference, but if you put a picture in a frame, it just suddenly looks even nicer than it did before. Frames set it off. So Walton is going to the North Pole and we have a frame, right? It's not the real main part of the story, but it's a frame. So we've got that going on, and then we've got the actual story. And remember what's happening the whole time you're reading. Victor is sitting on Walton's ship, telling him, and Walton is writing it down and sending it to his sister. It's all a letter in which Walton is writing down what Victor is saying. Do you see what I mean? And so we have like Russian nesting dolls, you know, it's one inside the other. And in the letter that Walton is writing, that's supposedly telling us legitimately what Victor said, Victor says things like, it was my fate, it was my destiny, it was the inexorable pull of whatever. Does that sound like someone who's taking responsibility for his actions?
No.
You know, it just doesn't to me. Like, well, you know what it reminds me of? This kills me every time I read it. You know, in the Exodus, when Moses is on Sinai and they're making the golden calf, you know, and then Moses comes back down and God says to Moses, like, get back down there because they're a bunch of rotters and they've gone off the rails, you know. That's not a direct quote from God, but that was the idea. And he goes back down, and then, does anybody remember what Aaron says? His brother Aaron. What? Yeah, he says the people made me do it.
And I just threw the gold in here and out came this guy.
He says, I threw the gold in and out came this calf. That so did not happen, Aaron. I don't believe that. Does he think Moses is actually going to? What happened, Moses? It's like we just threw some gold in. This calf came out. No. It did not happen that way. He's not saying, yeah, that was a terrible thing to do. He says, Alexander said, people made me do it, and, I don't know, this calf just came out. No, the proper response was, I have sinned. I am wrong. Moses, pray to God for me that I won't be struck dead. This is what he should be saying. Victor is the same. It's like, I don't know. It's like, I always just wanted to know these things. It was just like chance. It just impelled me. Destiny, fate. Victor, say, I did a bad thing. I'm sorry. No, he's not. He's not saying that. Okay. He wants to erase all the boundaries, right? Life, death, just like Prometheus. All right. So he makes a creature. He says, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. And he says, he does do this, to give him credit. He tells Walton, learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example. How dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. I want to become more than what I am. I want to be the giver of life on my terms. Because remember, we already have the power to be the givers of life. We can have children. No, I'm going to be the giver of life on my terms. So he creates a creature and brings it to life. And I don't know how many times I read Frankenstein before I noticed this. It's creepy. He says, I collected bones from charnel houses and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. I don't know if he literally means like bones, or body parts. Like if he attached meat actually to... That's not the creepy part, though. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets in attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room, he's going to say the two places that furnished my materials. The dissecting room, okay, we got that, medical experiments. And the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials. What do they slaughter at slaughterhouses?
Like disposable animals, like when you eat.
It's got animal parts. See, now I want it to be like a minotaur or something. Like an animal head. Okay, so maybe, because, they do experiment, they do transplant. They've tried transplanting animal organs into human beings. Do you know what I mean? Like the pig heart or whatever, you know what I mean? And if you're going to die because your organ is failing, hey, I'll take one from the animal if it'll keep me alive, right? It's okay. So maybe that's what it means, but now I've got this really bizarre picture in my head that I can't let go of. Animal body parts. That's what it says, the dissecting room and the slaughterhouse. Okay.
Maybe that's part of why Frankenstein is like quicker. I mean,
Yeah, because it says he's larger. He's obviously really fast and really strong. And apparently sort of impervious to the weather. It sounds like he does maybe get miserable, because at the part that you read, before he got to the cottage, like he's wandering around in the rain and whatever, and he's cold, and he got cold. But he's obviously more sturdy than the average human being. I don't know. But it says, that he met him right before you stopped reading, right? He met him up in the Alps. He's just like running up mountainsides and stuff. He's really super strong. Your project can decide what animals gave him all his traits. No, not really. unless you really want to. So, what is his response to his creation?
Disgust and horror.
Yay. I worked for a couple of years. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't hurt anything else. And then I finally did it, and I'm just grossed out.
Wouldn't he be grossed out once he's like halfway?
You would think so. You would think so.
Well, maybe when it's moving.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not doing this cracks me up. Does anybody remember? It wakes up, and what does he do? What does Victor do? Does anybody remember what he immediately does?
He runs away. Yeah.
You ran away.
And he does something. I'm reading it. My husband decided to read Frankenstein last fall because he knew I was going to teach it, and then we watched we'd watched the Daniel Radcliffe, but we watched a Kenneth Branagh one. And we've been talking about this. It says, and I am not kidding. All right. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endued with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Actually, that's. I wanted to start before. Just a second. Here we go. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. I slept indeed, but was disturbed by the wildest dreams. Hello, what did he just do?
That was a terrible idea.
He left it.
I went downstairs and took a nap. I just brought a creature, a huge, hideous creature, and it's moving around. It's like, I'm exhausted. I gotta go get some sleep. What? And he wakes up and it's just standing there over him. This is where I want to talk to Mary Shelley. I'm like, Mary, would you really go take a nap after? And then he runs away the next morning. He runs away from it then.
It's not like I didn't destroy it or anything when he had those chances.
Yeah. So, all these green things in this, it's like he uses words, dull yellow eye, convulsive motion, wretch, yellow skin, shriveled complexion, breathless horror, disgust, hue of death, miserable, convulsed, grave worms crawling. He's not a fan of this thing that he has built. This is his reaction. Now, okay, let's skip up. When the creature encounters him in the Alps and says, I am going to tell you my story, he says this, I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural Lord and King, if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall be again be virtuous. Which, this is the last question. I blew up the last question. Misery has made me a fiend. And make me happy, and I will be virtuous. But what I want to, we'll circle back around to that, but I want to focus on that. I ought to be thy Adam. If the creature is his Adam, who is Victor?
It's like
He's God.
He's the creature's God. And how did he treat his creature?
Like the devil.
He spurned him. He ran away from him. He didn't help him. He ignored him. In another place, the creature, refers to him as my father. This is my father. If you're going to bring a creature into the world, don't do it like this, first of all, but even just the normal way. You owe it something, right? You owe it parental care. Now, does anybody remember what Victor's childhood was like? He starts off when he's talking to Walton, telling his life story. He talks a little bit about his own childhood. Did he have nice parents? He had super nice parents. He said, they watched over me, my every whim, everything I wanted, it was just lovely. And then his brother, and then Elizabeth comes, and they grow up, and, he has this idyllic childhood. He knows how parents are supposed to take care of children. He also knows what it's like to lose a parent. His mom died. And set him on this, path, or pushed him farther down the path, maybe. And when he has a chance to care for his child or his creation, whether he's the father or the God, he doesn't do it. He runs away, and he's, I don't want to deal with you. I don't want to deal with this. It's pretty bad. As you finish the book this week, I would also like you to, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I would like you to ponder. I didn't ask this question on your reading guide or anything, but how do you think Mary Shelley feels about God? If Victor is God, if Victor is the creature's God, if that's representative of how God treats his creatures, I'm curious if it reflects Mary Shelley. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about her life next week. But just if Victor stands in for God and the creature stands in for us, what is God like?
I don't really have an opinion.
No, maybe not. Maybe not. So as you finish, I want you to see if anything changes in that. So you read this. Little William has been killed, the little brother, right? And Justine has been accused. Right? I haven't gone past what you've read, right?
No, I thought
We read this. Okay, yeah, because this is in chapter 10. And remember, this is Victor telling the story, and he's hearing that, Justine's been executed. William is dead. I listened to this discourse with the extremest agony. I, not in deed but in effect, was the true murderer. Victor says, I did this. I caused these people's death. And reading this book, I'm like, yeah, dude, you did. But if Victor is like God, we have to ask the question, and this is for you to think about too, is the Creator responsible for the deeds of the creature? Do we blame the Creator when the creature goes bad? Actually, this is a very good question even today. Do we blame the parents when the children go bad? Because, this is being discussed. Do you guys know this? There have been more shootings. When teenagers get a hold of a gun or whatever and go shoot up the school or the mall, they're starting to hold the parents responsible for making a gun available, maybe, for just the fact that maybe they knew something was up and didn't try to stop it. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a parent. Do good parents sometimes have bad children? Didn't we write a sum on that? Didn't we read something where we talked about oh, you know what? It was years ago. It was the Rome year. It was Nero. It was Seneca and Nero. You were in that year too, weren't you? It's the question again. What do we do when the parent creates a bad child? But if it's God, do we blame God because we're bad? Do you see? Because he's removed himself. Anyway, it's something to think about. One last thing, we'll pop back up to the next to last question I asked you. How does Shelley describe the countryside and landscapes? What feeling do her descriptions give you, and what are some of the key adjectives she uses? There's some sections where she describes that
The Alps and everything.
in the Alps. How does she describe them?
Well, one of the key, like beautiful, and like one of the keywords is magnificent. I heard that a lot.
Magnificent. This is a nice Latin moment. Magnus, large, great. Facio, made factus. Magnificent. Made larger than life. Made great. Made big. Another one that we hit several times is sublime. Here, let me skip over to page 64 through 67 in mine. Okay, I just, boom, 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 I have a bunch of adjectives underlined. I'm just going to read them to you. Magnificence, immense, mighty, magnificent, sublime, wonderful, sublime, supreme, magnificent. In 2 pages. She's describing the Alps. And yes, she's describing them for 2 pages. So we know what magnificent means. Sublime. Do you have any feeling what somebody means when they say something is sublime? We don't use that word very much anymore, honestly. It's kind of old-fashioned sounding. We say, from the ridiculous to the sublime, if you turn from something silly to something more important or weighty sometimes. Sublime means lofty, higher than us, but not necessarily physically higher. Do you know?
Elegant?
Elegant, like take your breath away. Almost like it belongs to heaven, like it belongs to a different sort of world. Heaven is sublime. Spirit is sublime. So we don't really, I don't know, maybe because we don't really believe that things are sublime anymore. Maybe it's not a very popular word. A lot of people we live with don't believe in the sublime. But she uses it, magnificent and sublime, numerous times in a 2-page period. And so she's telling us that landscape has deeper meaning, right? It's magnificent, it's sublime, it's magnificent, over and over and over again. And I just wanted to remind you about these romantic poets and romantic authors. Her husband, Percy Shelley, is one of them. Their friend Byron is one of them. And remember what they're pushing back against. They're pushing back against everything can be weighed and measured and quantified in a lab. And like, no, it can't. Some things are just sublime. There's no sublime-o-meter. You know what I mean? This mountain is X% more sublime than that mountain. You can't do that. Even beauty. Like which landscape is more beautiful, and by what percent does it exceed beauty of the other? That'd be a stupid question. You couldn't answer that question. And so remember these romantic authors. They're pushing back against this, saying, no. There is stuff that speaks directly to your heart that you can't measure in a lab. So she's hanging out with a group that's their thing, right? We are the romantic poets, and we care about nature. They're very, very into nature. And so it's not surprising that she sets it, first of all, in a place where she's actually living while she's writing the story. She's in Switzerland, in the Alps, unfortunately not hiking because the volcano. But also that they cared so much. They thought that nature was like a conduit of something spiritual to us. And, I'm not sure that they're all wrong about that. It says the heavens declare the glory of God, the Bible, and the earth shows forth his handiwork. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do for me next week. I would like you to write one paragraph, 250 to 300 words, and I want you to address these two questions. Is science good, bad, or neutral? And then as an afterthought, after I wrote this question, I thought I would also like you to address, does science equal technology? Are science and technology the same thing? Do we mean the same thing by them? We use them often together. They're two words that we encounter together often. But I'd like to know if you think they mean the same thing. You could look them up in a dictionary if you want. And then, so you can address this question accordingly. If science isn't the same thing as technology, then is science good, bad, or neutral? But if it is the same thing as technology, then this question becomes, is science/technology good, bad, or neutral? Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Right? So you kind of have to answer this one first. So a quick dictionary search would answer that for you, or if you think what they mean. And then you can use it to answer this question. Is science just there? Is technology just there? Is it automatically good or is it automatically bad? And you can certainly use Frankenstein as as an example, because obviously he's using science/technology to create this being, to create life. And then I would also like you to finish Frankenstein when we're halfway through it. And
Do we still use the three?
you know what? You do not have to include the special unless you want to. I'm trying to remember parallelisms and antithesis. Is that all we've added so far this year?
I think so.
Oh, we got to add something new next time we do a paper. No, don't, unless you want to. I mean, they're always really, really good for your writing. That's why it's not just to be tiresome. It's because when you use those devices, it makes your writing pop. But I'm not going to scan your paper for it, but use them if you want to. All right, and finish Frankenstein. And we're like 4 minutes early, but I'll let you go. Unless anybody has a question or a comment.
Is this for next week?
This is for next week. Right? Bring me this, just one paragraph. Just one paragraph. All right? Otherwise, if you're on video, I hope that you're feeling better, or everybody will be back next week. Bye, guys.